beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness.
One of the top theological questions is, where did God come from? When heaven and earth were yet unmade, when there was empty blackness and void formlessness and darkness was on the face of the deep, when time was yet unknown, thou in thy bliss and majesty did live and love alone. He called light out of darkness, he called cosmos out of chaos, that is, he called order out of confusion. But the question still clamors for an answer. Where did God come from?
The earth was created 6,000 years ago in 6 days by God. I am confused. Being philosophically consistent and being a very honest person, I'm sure you can tell me where God came from. And in addition, once you've told me where God comes from, please try to clarify how you can figure that a spiritual force can have an impact on a material universe to create it.
If you believe that God created the universe, then logically you've got to ask the question, who created God? And then you have to ask, who created the God that created the God that created the God that created the God that created God, and so on ad infinitum. Well, let's analyze it for a moment. Who created God? If you ask that question, it shows you've immediately categorized God as created. So you're talking about a created God. This question is extremely interesting because it's an illustration of a question that already rules out the explanation that's most likely to be true. Because the Christian claim is that God wasn't created.
The world, whatever you believe, if you grant that, you can't get something from nothing, right? You can't get something from nothing. It can't be the case if you accept, as I think everybody does, that that this option is ruled out. Once upon a time, there was absolutely nothing, and then all of a sudden, there was everything, or anything. You can't get anything from nothing. You know, that just goes against all logic. So, if you believe that you can't get something from nothing, and you grant that there is now something, which I'm hoping you do since I'm talking to you and I'm a something and so are you, then there must have always been a something. Everyone has to believe that something has been forever. Otherwise, we'd still have nothing. So it's a question of what is the something that has been around forever? Now, here's the thing. Everything we know about the physical world tells us that it's not a good candidate for something that has been around forever. Especially since the 30s of the last century, with the acceptance of the Big Bang Theory, which is pretty much uniform now, which is telling us that this universe, as we now know it, is a one-way show. It's a one-time, one-way show. Everything indicates that energy is being used up, as I mentioned earlier. Second law of thermodynamics is very well established. The suns are running out of energy. We now know that the outer rim of the universe, the farther out we go, the faster it's expanding. So the expansion seems to be speeding up, and we have no way of explaining that. Energy is being used, and everything we know about it is that it's used up. So the physical world, physical reality, isn't a good candidate for the something that must have always been for there to be anything. So whatever there was that is the cause of what is, it must be quite different than what is. Because what is, by definition, as far as we know it, can't always have been. And I submit to you that all contingent reality, which is simply reality that could be otherwise, this chair, you, me, virtually everything you're seeing here, it came into being, it goes out of being, and it's forever on the precipice of non-being. It's not solid. It disappears in time. That all of those things don't explain themselves. None of this explains themselves. And the totality of contingent things don't explain themselves. They're like rope. Everything depends on everything else. It's like dominoes. And at some point, you have to suppose that there must be something that's very much unlike what we're trying to explain what we're in the process of.
So if God was uncreated, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, He already was. So the central Christian claim is, and in Judaism and Islam, of course, equally, is that God is eternal. So the question, by definition, doesn't even apply to Him. The only way you can get anything out of it then, in the negative sense, is to assume that everything is in the category of the created, but that's just begging the original question. And the Greeks were interested in it, and that's why John's Gospel starts with those words. In the beginning, the Word already was, and then it says, all things came to be through Him. The Greeks were interested in the question of two categories: the things that came to be, the created things, and the things that already were. And the question resolves down to this: is there a thing or a being that never came to be? And that is the Christian claim, and He's called God. You say that who created God is a legitimate question. I don't think it is, but let me assume now that it is. You believe that the universe created you. So I beg leave now to ask you, using your own question, who created your creator? I'm waiting still for the answer. I was talking to about 1,000 scientists, and a man came up to me afterwards, a physicist, and he said, that was very interesting, all that talk about God, but he said, do you know, I detect you're a Christian. As a Christian, you're obliged to believe that God is a triunity, that Jesus was God and man. And he said, no, come on, you're a mathematician at Oxford. This is absurd. Can you explain it to me? Well, I said, can I ask you a question first? He said, sure. So I said, tell me, what is consciousness? And he thought for a second, and then he said, I don't know. I said, that's okay, let me try an easier one. What is energy? Well, he said, I'm a physicist, I can measure energy, I could use it. I said, you know, that's not my question. What is it? He said, I don't know. Oh, I said, that's very interesting. You don't know. Tell me, I said, do you believe in consciousness? Yes, he said. Do you believe in energy? Yes, he said. So I said, you believe in these two things and you don't know what they are. I said, should I write you off as an intellectual? And he said, please don't. And I said, but that's exactly what you were going to do with me 5 minutes ago. Now I said, if you don't know what energy is, and nobody does, if you don't know what energy is, don't be surprised if energy, light, gravity, and consciousness are a mystery. Don't be surprised if you're going to get an element of this in God. You're bound to get it.
Question, who created God? Well, this is not at all difficult to answer. A timeless, eternal being cannot have a cause. As Keith Ward points out in his book, God, Chance, and Necessity, if one asks what caused God, the answer is that nothing could bring into being a reality which wholly transcends space-time and which is self-existent. To fail to grasp such an idea is to fail to grasp what God is. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Something cannot come into being out of nothing. But if something is eternal and timeless, then it doesn't fall under that first premise. It doesn't need a cause. Even atheists like Daniel Dennett recognize that if eternal verities exist, like numbers or mathematical objects, they don't need a cause because they never come into being. They don't begin to exist. And the concept of God is the concept of an eternal, self-existent, necessary being, and therefore the answer is simply that God is uncaused. He is self-existent.
Our definition of God is the uncreated creator of the universe. So to ask the question, who created the uncreated creator, is kind of like asking, what sound does silence make? Or, do you see what I'm saying? There's a definition of silence that precludes us from asking the question. And that is really what we're doing here when we ask the question, who created the uncreated creator of the universe? Do we as Christians have a problem in grounding our beliefs in a God that is uncreated? Does the atheist have a better answer for this? Well, I'll tell you, as a non-believer, and I was a non-believer till I was 35, I also believed in an uncreated creator. Maybe it was a multiverse generator. Maybe it was some quantum environment in which our universe emerged spontaneously. Regardless of what it was that caused the universe, as an atheist, I would have told you that that thing was uncreated. So it turns out everyone believes there's an uncreated creator.
So which
I want you to fill in the story of the rest of the beginning of the universe. God, spiritual matter, impact on material matter.
Okay, so 2 questions. All right.
Go ahead.
All right, your question, where did God come from, assumes that you're thinking of the wrong, obviously it displays that you're thinking of the wrong God. Because the God of the Bible is not affected by time, space, or matter. If he's affected by time, space, or matter, he's not God. Time, space, and matter is what we call a continuum. All of them have to come into existence at the same instant. Because if there were matter but no space, where would you put it? If there were matter and space but no time, when would you put it? You cannot have time, space, or matter independently. They have to come into existence simultaneously. The Bible answers that in 10 words. In the beginning, there's time. God created the heaven, there's space, and the earth. There's matter. So you have time, space, matter created a trinity of trinities there. Just, time is past, present, future. Space has length, width, height. Matter has solid, liquid, gas. You have a trinity of trinities created instantaneously, and the God who created them has to be outside of them. If he's limited by time, he's not God. The guy who created this computer is not in the computer. He's not running around in there changing the numbers on the screen, okay? The God who created this universe is outside of the universe. He's above it, beyond it, in it, through it. He's unaffected by it. So the concept that a spiritual force cannot have any effect on a material body, well then I guess you'd have to explain to me things like emotions and love and hatred and envy and jealousy and rationality. I mean, if your brain is just a random collection of chemicals that formed by chance over billions of years, how on earth can you trust your own reasoning processes and the thoughts that you think? Okay, so your question, where did God come from, is assuming a limited God. And that's your problem. The God that I worship is not limited by time, space, or matter. If I could fit the infinite God in my 3-pound brain, he would not be worth worshiping, that's for certain. So that's the God that I worship. Thank you.
And the answer is he came from nowhere. Now that's theologically correct and it's biblically sound. For Habakkuk said, I saw him when he left the hills of Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran, and Teman simply means nothing or nowhere. So he came from nowhere. I made that statement in Detroit some time ago, and a man talked with me after the meeting, and he said, Preacher, let's be reasonable about this thing. You up there tonight talking about God came from nowhere. That doesn't make sense. Let's be reasonable about it. I said, all right. If you just want to be reasonable about it, the reason God came from nowhere, there wasn't anywhere for him to come from. And coming from nowhere, he stood on nothing. And the reason he had to stand on nothing, there was nowhere for him to stand. And standing on nothing, he reached out where there was nowhere to reach and caught something when there was nothing to catch and hung something on nothing and told it to stay there. Now you'll find that in Job 26:7 that he hung this world on nothing. And standing on nothing, he took the hammer of his own will and he struck the anvil of his omnipotence, and sparks flew therefrom. And he caught them on the tips of his fingers and flung them out into space and bedecked the heavens with stars. And nobody said a word. The reason nobody said anything, there wasn't anybody there to say anything. So God himself said, that's good. And God has given Christ a name that's above every name. That at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father.